Scary telling. This happened during my teenage years. My family and I were visiting our relatives who lived in a small town. We stayed in a small house that had only one working fan, which was in the room where my siblings and I slept. The summer heat was unbearable, and we all crammed into that one room to escape the oppressive weather. One night, while I was sound asleep, I suddenly woke up. I opened my eyes and saw someone sitting in the chair on the corner of the room. The figure was hunched over, and their face was hidden in the shadows. I tried to speak, but no words would come out of my mouth. I was paralyzed with fear and couldn't move a muscle. The longer I stared at the figure, the more unnerved I became. It didn't move or make a sound, but I felt its eyes boring into me. I wanted to scream, but I was too afraid to make a sound. After what felt like an eternity, the figure slowly rose from the chair and disappeared into the darkness. The next morning, I told my siblings and parents about what I had seen, but they dismissed it as a bad dream. However, I knew what I had seen was real. Every night after that, I would lay in bed, wide awake, and watch the corner of the room where the figure had been sitting. Days passed, and we had to leave our relative's house to go back home. As we were packing our bags, my aunt came over to say goodbye. I mustered up the courage to tell her about the figure I had seen in the room. To my surprise, she didn't seem surprised at all. She calmly explained to me that the house was believed to be haunted by a ghost. The ghost was said to be a woman who had died in the house many years ago. She was known to appear to visitors, especially to children. I was shocked and scared, but also relieved that what I had seen wasn't just a figment of my imagination. I felt validated and understood. Years have passed since that night, and I've never forgotten about the figure I saw in that room. I've also never experienced anything like it since. But to this day, I can still remember the feeling of dread that washed over me as I lay in that room, staring at the empty chair. I was 12 years old, walking home from school. It was a short walk, less than 2 blocks, but I was new to town and still getting used to my surroundings. As I turned the corner onto my street, I noticed a man sitting in his car, watching me intently. I tried to ignore him and kept walking, but my heart started racing when I heard the car door open. The man stepped out of the car and started walking towards me. I could see that he wasn't wearing any pants, and my fear turned into sheer panic. I started running as fast as I could, with the man following closely behind. I spotted a house with a glass door and ran towards it. I burst through the door, not even bothering to knock or ring the bell, and screamed, "Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. I'm home." My parents were both surprised to see me and asked what had happened. I explained that a man had been following me, and they immediately called the police. The officers arrived within minutes and searched the area, but the man was nowhere to be found. For weeks after the incident, I felt like I was being watched everywhere I went. I started having nightmares about the man and would wake up in a cold sweat, convinced that he was standing right outside my window. One day, as I was sitting at my computer, I received an email from an unknown sender. The message was short and simple: "I know what you did." I felt my blood run cold as I read the words. Who could possibly know about the incident with the man? Was he somehow still following me, even after all this time? I tried to shake off the feeling of unease and went about my day as usual. But as the days went on, the emails kept coming. They were always short and cryptic, but they left me feeling more and more unnerved. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard a noise outside my window. I opened the blinds and peered outside, but didn't see anything unusual. I shrugged it off and crawled into bed, but couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Just as I was about to drift off to sleep, I heard a soft tapping at my bedroom door. I froze, unable to move or even breathe. The tapping grew louder and more insistent until I could hear someone whispering my name. I finally mustered the courage to get out of bed and approach the door. As I reached for the handle, the tapping stopped. I slowly opened the door, but there was no one there. I turned on the lights and searched every inch of my room, but found nothing out of the ordinary. But when I sat back down at my computer, I saw that I had received another email from the unknown sender. The message was chillingly simple: "I'm inside." I quickly realized that I was not alone in my room. The man from years ago had somehow found me, and he was now in my home. I could hear him moving around in the darkness, getting closer and closer to where I was sitting. I had never felt such raw terror in my life. I didn't know what to do or where to go. But as the man drew closer, I knew that I had to act fast. I slammed shut the lid of my laptop, stood up, and turned on the lights. And there, standing in front of me, was the man who had been following me for all those years. I don't remember much after that. The police were called, and the man was arrested. But the memory of that night still haunts me, and I always make sure to keep my doors and windows locked tight, even though I know that won't necessarily keep out the things that go bump in the night. It turned out that the man who had been following me all those years ago was a convicted sex offender who had recently been released from prison. He had been living in the area and had been watching me for weeks before he decided to make his move. The emails that I had been receiving were just a sick game to him, a way of tormenting me and making me feel as though he was always watching. And in a way, he was. I don't know what would have happened to me if I hadn't run into that house and called out for my parents. But I do know that I was lucky, and that not everyone gets a second chance. So now, whenever I walk down the street, I keep my eyes open and my wits about me. Because you never know when an uninvited guest might come knocking at your door. It was the middle of the night, and I was driving down a long, desolate stretch of highway. I had been on the road for hours and was desperate for a place to stop and rest. Just when I thought I would never find civilization again, I saw a sign for a town up ahead. It was called Millfield, and I had never heard of it before. But I didn't care. I was just grateful to have found a place to stay. As I drove into the town, I was struck by how quiet and still it was. There were no cars on the road and no people on the sidewalks. The only sound was the soft rustling of the leaves in the wind. I found a motel and checked in, eager to get some sleep. But as I settled into bed, I noticed that something was off. It was too quiet. I couldn't hear any traffic or people talking outside. I got up to look out the window and saw that the entire town was deserted. The streets were empty, and there were no lights on in any of the buildings. It was as if the entire population had vanished into thin air. I was too scared to go outside, so I decided to stay in my room and wait until morning. But as the night wore on, I heard strange noises coming from the hallway outside my room. It sounded like someone was walking around, dragging their feet along the carpet. I tried to ignore the sounds and go back to sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I felt like something was in the room with me, even though I couldn't see anything. Finally, as the sun began to rise, I mustered the courage to leave my room and explore the town. But as I walked through the deserted streets, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There were no people in Millfield, but there were signs of their presence. The cars were still parked on the streets, and the doors to the shops and houses were wide open. It was as if everyone had suddenly disappeared in the middle of their daily lives. As I walked through the town, I felt like I was being followed. I could hear footsteps behind me, but every time I turned around, there was no one there. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I saw a figure in the distance. It was a woman, walking towards me with a blank expression on her face. I ran up to her and asked what had happened to the town, but she didn't answer. She just kept walking, as if I wasn't even there. I ran back to my car and drove out of Millfield as fast as I could. As I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw that the town had vanished behind me. It was as if it had never existed at all. I never found out what had happened to the people of Millfield, and I never went back. But the memory of that night still haunts me, and I always wonder if there are other towns out there, hidden away from the rest of the world, waiting to be discovered and forgotten once again.